There are some paintings that were never meant to be seen. They do not belong in museums. They do not belong in private collections. They do not belong to history at all. And yet, in the spring of 1865, as the American Civil War collapsed into ash and silence, 17 such paintings appeared in Richmond, Virginia. Their sudden arrival would unsettle everyone who saw them, and their disappearance would leave behind a trail of fear, death, and unanswered questions that still echo today. This is not a story about talent. It is not even a story about art. It is a story about desperation, deception, and the terrible cost of believing in miracles when the world is falling apart. In April of 1865, Confederate soldiers were limping home through the ruined roads of Tidewater, Virginia. The war was ending. Richmond had burned. The Confederacy was dying. And yet, inside one of the city's most respected art galleries, visitors stood in stunned silence before a collection of oil paintings that seemed to belong to another world entirely. The paintings showed biblical scenes. Christ in shadow, angels emerging from darkness, faces lit by a single, impossible source of light. The brushwork was flawless. The understanding of anatomy was precise. The control of shadow and glow rivaled the greatest masters in European history. Critics whispered the same names again and again. Rembrandt, Caravaggio, Vermeer. But there was one problem. No one knew who had painted them. The artist was listed as anonymous. No background, no training history, no explanation. The gallery owner refused interviews. Collectors who attended private showings left shaken, some refusing to speak about what they had seen. Then the rumors began. They spread through parlors and churches, through half-ruined mansions and boarding houses filled with widows. People claimed to know the truth. A truth so disturbing that it made grown men lower their voices and glance over their shoulders before speaking. They said the paintings were created by a boy. Not a trained artist. Not a European master. A boy of 12 or 13 years old. An enslaved boy. And the most terrifying part was this. The boy had no hands. Witnesses claimed his wrists ended in blunt stumps just below where his palms should have been. No fingers. No thumbs. No possible way to hold a brush. And yet, somehow, impossibly, he produced works that experienced painters could not copy. Paintings that made viewers feel watched. Paintings that caused unease they could not explain. Within 3 months, the paintings vanished. The gallery closed without warning. The owner died suddenly under circumstances newspapers described only as unfortunate. Several collectors tried to destroy the works they had purchased. At least one failed and refused to explain why. Then, in July of 1865, a plantation 40 miles west of Richmond burned to the ground in the middle of the night. Thornhill Plantation. The fire consumed the main house, the slave quarters, the outbuildings, and every record inside them. No cause was ever officially determined. And just like that, the story disappeared. For more than 150 years, it survived only in fragments. A nervous line in a diary. A coded letter between lawyers. Family stories whispered but never written down. Until now. Recently, a collection of documents surfaced from the estate of a long-dead Richmond attorney. Letters, testimonies, and most chilling of all, a journal kept by a Union officer stationed in Virginia during Reconstruction. Together, these papers reveal what truly happened at Thornhill Plantation. And it begins with a man who had lost everything. Silas Thorne stood on the porch of his plantation house in April of 1865, staring down a road that no longer led anywhere. The grand oak trees that once lined the drive had been chopped down by deserters for firewood. What remained looked like broken teeth reaching toward a gray sky. Silas was 43, but grief and war had carved deep lines into his face. His coat had been patched until the original fabric was barely visible. His boots were held together with wire. The proud world he had inherited was collapsing around him. The tobacco fields lay abandoned. The plantation produced nothing. Most of the enslaved people had fled north with Union troops. Those who remained were trapped by age, sickness, or nowhere else to go. Silas had once been a dreamer. He was educated at the College of William and Mary. In his youth, he had toured Europe, standing before the great paintings of Florence, Amsterdam, and Paris. He had wept before Rembrandt. He had filled sketchbooks with copies of Renaissance works. He believed Thornhill could become something more than a plantation. A cultural center. A place of beauty. The war destroyed all of that. His wife died of typhoid. His 2 sons never returned from Gettysburg. His wealth vanished. His world ended while he watched helplessly from his porch. By the spring of 1865, Silas Thorne needed salvation. Or at least the illusion of it. The idea came to him one night while standing alone in the second-floor gallery of his house. Candles flickered against the few paintings he still owned, mostly copies, reminders of what he once hoped to be. That was when the thought took shape. He would not train an artist. He would not hire one. He would create a miracle. And he already knew the perfect subject. The boy named Elias. Elias had arrived at Thornhill in 1861, purchased at auction in Richmond. He was 9 years old then. Small, quiet, with eyes that seemed far too old for his face. The bill of sale listed one detail that lowered his price. Hands missing below wrists. Injury at age 4. Cause unknown. Silas barely noticed him at first. But over time, he saw something strange. Elias watched everything. He watched books being read. He watched paintings being cleaned. He stood silently in doorways, studying images with an intensity that unsettled anyone who noticed. And one afternoon, Silas found drawings scratched into the dirt floor of a shed. Biblical scenes, perfect proportions, light and shadow carved from dust. That was when Silas Thorne realized the boy was dangerous. Not because of what he lacked, but because of what he could become. And that realization would set into motion a deception so dark that everyone who touched it would pay a terrible price. This was the beginning of the impossible paintings. And the nightmare of Thornhill Plantation. Part 2. The miracle on display. Some lies are whispered, others are built carefully, layer by layer, until they feel real enough to breathe. This was that kind of lie. On the cold morning of April 1865, Silas Thorne stood on his porch and thought about the drawings he had once found scratched into dirt. Crude lines made with a stick held between the stumps of a child's wrists. Ugly at first glance, yet filled with something unsettling. Perspective that made sense. Bodies that felt solid. Space that felt deep. It should not have been possible. But Silas had remembered. Now he watched the road and waited for the man who could turn desperation into opportunity. He thought about the paintings rotting in his gallery. He thought about his debt. He thought about the one person on the plantation who could help him make the impossible appear real. Her name was Lena. She was 26 years old and had been born at Thornhill Plantation. Her mother had worked in the main house. Her father had been Silas's father, though no one ever said that out loud. Lena had grown up in the space between worlds, never fully enslaved, never truly free. Allowed to read, allowed to stay close, always reminded that everything she had could be taken away without warning. Silas's wife Margaret had despised her. Margaret had seen Lena as proof of betrayal carved into living flesh. While Margaret lived, Lena's life had been quiet and carefully controlled. Margaret was gone now. Lena remained. She could read and write. Silas's mother had taught her in secret years ago. But more importantly, Lena could paint. Silas had discovered that by accident one night 5 years earlier when he found her in the upstairs gallery, candle burning low, copying one of his paintings onto a scrap of canvas. She had made her own paints from crushed berries and clay. Her hands shook when she saw him. He should have punished her. Instead, he watched. Her copy was rough but honest. The light made sense. The shadows knew where to fall. Over time, Silas began leaving supplies where she could find them. He never spoke of it. He never praised her. He simply allowed it. Now he planned to use her. He planned to use everyone. A horse appeared at the end of the road. The rider wore Union blue. Captain James Whitfield had arrived exactly when Silas expected. Whitfield had been assigned to document Confederate property for possible seizure. Silas had written to him weeks earlier, hinting at something unusual, something valuable. As the captain dismounted, Silas forced his face into practiced defeat. "Captain Whitfield," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. I believe I have something that will interest you greatly." Whitfield's expression was cautious. He had heard too many promises from ruined men. Still, curiosity pulled him forward. Inside the house, the air smelled of dust and old grief. They climbed to the second-floor gallery where sunlight barely reached through filthy windows. Whitfield stood in the center of the room, studying the paintings on the walls with polite boredom. "These are yours?" he asked. Silas waved them away. "Relics," he said. "Copies. Ghosts of better days. What I wish to show you is something else entirely." He drew back a cloth covering the first painting. Whitfield stepped closer. The captain did not speak at first. His eyes moved slowly across the canvas. The lighting, the depth, the emotion locked into the faces. It was better than it should have been. Better than anything Silas owned. "I discovered these 3 weeks ago," Silas said softly. "Hidden away in a locked room no one had entered in years." Whitfield frowned. "Who painted them?" Silas hesitated just long enough to seem reluctant. "At first I did not know. Then I asked questions. I spoke to those who have been here longer than anyone alive. And they told me a story." Whitfield turned. "They told me about a boy. An enslaved child brought here 4 years ago. A boy with no hands. His wrists end in stumps." Whitfield's disbelief was immediate. "That is not possible." Silas nodded. "I thought the same. Until I saw him work." The trap was set. 10 minutes later, they stood in the old smokehouse. The racks were gone. The walls were whitewashed. A table stood in the center like an altar. The smell of turpentine and oil filled the air. Elias stood beside the table. He was taller now but still thin. His clothes were clean. His wrists were exposed. The stumps were smooth and pale, the ends rounded and healed long ago. He did not smile. He did not frown. His face was empty. Silas had taught him that. Say nothing. Do nothing. Let them imagine. On the table lay a painting in progress. Judith and Holofernes. Blood suggested, not shown. Darkness pressing inward. Judith's face held both horror and resolve. Whitfield stared. "How did he do this?" he whispered. Silas picked up a brush. He placed it carefully between the boy's wrists. Elias adjusted his arms, gripping with practiced pressure. Slowly, carefully, he raised the brush and touched it to the canvas. The motion was awkward, deliberate, convincing. Whitfield watched in silence. What he did not see was the truth hidden beneath the performance. That the painting had already been completed by Lena the night before. That Elias's task was only to move the brush through empty space or over areas already dry. That the illusion mattered more than the act itself. What Whitfield saw was a miracle. The captain stepped back, shaken. "This will cause a sensation," he said. Silas lowered his eyes. "I fear for the boy," he said quietly. "People do not react kindly to what they do not understand." Whitfield nodded slowly. He did not know he had just become part of a lie that would ruin lives. He did not know the paintings would spread like a sickness. He did not know that Elias was only the face of something far darker. And he did not know that once the miracle was revealed to the world, there would be no way to contain it. Because miracles demand a price. And everyone at Thornhill was about to pay. Part 3. The Watchers. The most dangerous lies are the ones people want to believe. By the time the experts arrived at Thornhill Plantation, the lie Silas Thorne had created was no longer fragile. It was alive. It breathed through every whispered conversation, every careful glance, every hopeful thought that this broken land might still produce something miraculous. That belief made everyone careless. Captain Whitfield returned on a Thursday morning with 3 visitors. Dr. Edmund Hartley from the College of William and Mary. Charles Brennan, a respected portrait painter from Richmond. And Abigail Sutton, a wealthy widow whose money and curiosity opened many doors. Silas welcomed them with the humility of a defeated man and the confidence of someone guarding a secret treasure. He led them through the house and into the upstairs gallery, where the paintings waited. They stood in silence. Hartley leaned close, peering through his spectacles. Brennan studied the brushwork with narrowed eyes. Mrs. Sutton clasped her gloved hands to her chest as if she were standing before something holy. "The technique is remarkable," Hartley said at last. "The shadows are controlled. The figures have weight. Whoever painted these understood the old masters deeply." Brennan nodded slowly. "There is discipline here. This is not amateur work." Silas felt his heart pound but kept his face calm. Then Hartley frowned. "There are inconsistencies," he said. "Some areas are confident. Others hesitate, as if different moods guided the hand. Or different hands. Silas had expected this. The boy's condition affects his control, he replied smoothly. Pain, fatigue. Some days are better than others. What you see is struggle recorded in paint. Hartley considered this. He wanted to believe. They all did. I need to observe him working, Hartley said. Not briefly. Over time. Silas bowed his head. Of course. That afternoon, they went to the smokehouse. The building had been transformed. Whitewashed walls. Clean floors. A large table positioned beneath a window. The smell of oil paint hung heavy in the air. Elias stood waiting. He wore clean clothes. His wrists were bare, the stumps smooth and healed. His face held no expression at all. On the table lay a prepared canvas. The Annunciation. Gabriel reaching toward Mary. A scene chosen carefully by Silas. Dramatic. Emotional. Forgiving. Hartley took his position close by. Brennan stood behind him. Mrs. Sutton sat on a stool, her eyes never leaving the boy. Show them how you work, Silas said gently. Elias picked up the brush. He wedged it between his wrists with practiced care. He leaned forward. His movements were slow and deliberate. His breathing controlled. He made a few strokes. They were rough, uneven, crude, but they were real. Hartley leaned closer. Brennan whispered something under his breath. Fascinating, Mrs. Sutton murmured. What they did not see was the truth behind the performance. The hours of rehearsal, the coaching, the fact that the canvas beneath Elias's brush had already been prepared by Lena the night before. The areas Elias touched were chosen carefully. Places where imperfection would seem natural. That night, after the visitors retired to the house, Lena returned to the smokehouse. Her body ached. Her hands trembled. Candlelight flickered across the unfinished canvas as she worked in silence. She painted where Elias could not. She smoothed rough strokes. She deepened shadows. She brought life to faces. She worked until her vision blurred. For 3 days, the experts observed. Elias performed during the day. Lena worked at night. Hartley asked questions. Brennan sketched notes. Mrs. Sutton brought gifts of sweets and whispered encouragements to Elias that made him shrink inward. By the 4th day, Hartley was convinced something extraordinary was happening. I have never seen anything like this, he admitted privately to Silas. The limitations should make this impossible. And yet the work continues. Silas nodded gravely. Suffering sharpens some souls, he said. God works through broken vessels. Hartley wrote notes late into the night. Brennan began to speak of exhibitions. Mrs. Sutton spoke of buyers. But something else was happening. Elias was changing. The boy grew quieter. His movements slowed. His eyes followed Lena when she passed the smokehouse at dawn, exhaustion etched into her face. One evening, as Silas watched Elias clean brushes, he noticed something unsettling. The boy was memorizing, not shapes, not colors, patterns. He watched the canvases. He watched the way light fell. He watched how Lena's corrections transformed his crude marks into mastery. Elias was learning, not to paint, to see. Hartley requested longer sessions. Silas agreed. Lena's workload increased. Her hands began to cramp so badly she could barely hold the brush some nights. Blood appeared beneath her fingernails where the wood pressed too hard. She said nothing. On the 6th night, Hartley scraped a tiny sample of paint from one canvas. Modern pigments, he murmured. But prepared carefully. Silas felt a flicker of fear. On the 7th day, Hartley asked Elias a question directly. Do you understand what you are painting, boy? Elias looked at him. Yes, sir, he said softly. Hartley smiled. Tell me about this angel. Elias hesitated. Then he spoke. He described light entering a room. He described fear and awe. He described wait and silence and the moment before change. Hartley stared. That is not something a child should understand, he whispered. That night, Lena collapsed onto her bed and did not move for hours. Silas stood alone in the smokehouse after midnight, staring at the paintings. He felt something cold crawling up his spine. The lie was growing larger than him. The experts were no longer simply observing. They were believing, and belief demanded more proof. More paintings, more performances, more suffering. Outside, the night wind moved through the ruined fields like a warning. And inside Thornhill Plantation, the watchers waited, unaware that the miracle they had come to witness was beginning to fracture. And when it broke, it would not break quietly. Part 4. The cracks in the miracle. Every miracle has a moment when it begins to rot. It does not happen all at once. It starts quietly. A hesitation, a doubt, a question asked 1 second too late. At Thornhill Plantation, that moment arrived on the 8th day of observation, when belief began to demand more than performance. Dr. Hartley woke before dawn and sat at the small desk in his guest room, reading over his notes. He had filled pages with observations about brush pressure, canvas preparation, pigment use, and Elias's movements. Nothing fit neatly. Everything contradicted itself. By mid-morning, he made a decision. "I want to isolate the boy," he told Silas at breakfast. "No interruptions. No visitors. Just him, the canvas, and time." Silas felt his throat tighten. "Of course," he said carefully. "Whatever you need." The smokehouse was prepared again. A fresh canvas stood ready. No sketch this time. Hartley wanted to see conception, not completion. Elias entered the room alone. Lena was told to remain in her quarters during daylight hours. Silas framed it as rest. She understood it as a warning. Elias stood before the blank canvas. The room felt colder than usual. "Begin when you are ready," Hartley said. Minutes passed. Elias lifted the brush between his wrists. His hands trembled slightly. He made a mark, then another. They were uncertain, wandering, wrong. Hartley leaned forward. "Take your time," he said gently. Elias nodded. But the longer he worked, the clearer the truth became. Without Lena's night work, without preparation, the miracle collapsed. The marks never formed figures. The shadows went nowhere. The canvas remained confused and broken. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Sutton looked away. Silas felt sweat gather beneath his collar. After 20 minutes, Hartley raised his hand. "That will be enough." Elias froze. Hartley studied the canvas, then the boy. "You are tired," he said slowly. "Let us stop for today." That night, Silas did not sleep. The next morning, he ordered Lena to work twice as fast. He told her the experts expected another completed painting within 3 days. He did not care how she managed it. Her hands shook as she painted. On the second night, she dropped a brush and began to cry without sound. Elias watched from the doorway. Later, when Silas had gone, Elias spoke. "You cannot keep doing this," he whispered. Lena did not look up. "We do not have a choice." But Elias had begun to understand something deeper. The lie was not just about paintings. It was about control, about ownership, about being shaped into something useful and consumed. On the 10th day, Hartley brought a small knife. He scraped deeper this time. Beneath the surface layers of paint, he found differences. Subtle, but undeniable. "2 hands," he murmured. Silas laughed nervously. "You see patterns where none exist." Hartley did not smile. "I see labor," he said. "And suffering." That afternoon, he asked Lena to bring tea to the gallery. It was the first time he looked at her closely. "Your hands," he said quietly. "They are stained." Lena stiffened. "I help clean brushes, sir." Hartley nodded slowly. That night, Elias did not sleep. He sat on his bed and stared at the dark. Images moved behind his eyes. Not paintings. Not figures. Moments. Lena working until she bled. Silas watching with hunger. The experts leaning closer. He realized then that the miracle had already escaped its cage. On the 12th day, Hartley confronted Silas privately. "I believe the boy is part of the process," he said carefully. "But not the whole of it." Silas said nothing. "There is another artist here," Hartley continued. "Someone skilled. Someone hidden." Silas smiled thinly. "You are mistaken." Hartley studied him. "Then why does the work improve overnight?" Silas's smile faded. That evening, rain began to fall. Heavy, unforgiving. Lena worked despite fever and shaking hands. Elias stood beside her. "Teach me," he said. She stopped. "Why?" "Because when this ends, they will come for you." She understood then. She showed him how to see shape in darkness. How to feel distance without touching. How to imagine light. He learned quickly. Too quickly. On the 14th day, the new painting was revealed. It was the crucifixion. Not beautiful, terrible. The faces were raw. The sky felt heavy. The suffering was unmistakable. Mrs. Sutton wept. Brennan turned pale. Hartley said nothing. Later that night, Hartley wrote a letter. He sealed it and placed it in his bag. The fire began shortly after midnight. It started in the smokehouse. By the time anyone noticed, the flames had climbed the walls. Paintings burned. Canvas curled. Smoke filled the air. Silas ran toward the fire screaming orders. Lena escaped through the back. Elias stood watching the flames. Hartley was pulled from the house coughing. By dawn, Thornhill Plantation was dying. And the miracle was gone. But the truth was not finished. Because fire destroys evidence, not memory. And what Elias had learned in the dark would follow everyone who survived. Into the next part of the story. Part 5. After the fire. Fire does not end a story. It only decides who gets to tell it. When dawn came to Thornhill Plantation, it revealed a landscape that looked like the aftermath of a battlefield. Smoke drifted low over the blackened remains of the smokehouse. The roof had collapsed inward. Charred beams lay twisted like broken bones. Ash coated the ground so thick it muffled footsteps. The miracle was gone. Silas Thorne stood in the yard staring at the ruin, his face gray, his eyes hollow. He had lost control of the thing he built, and he knew it. The paintings that were meant to save him had burned. The experts had seen too much. And the lie no longer belonged to him. Captain Whitfield arrived before noon. He dismounted slowly, his expression dark. Word of the fire had reached Richmond before sunrise. Fires on former plantations were not unusual, but this one was different. Too many important people had been present. Too many questions remained unanswered. Dr. Hartley sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, coughing from smoke. Mrs. Sutton had already been sent back to Richmond, shaken and silent. Brennan paced the yard, muttering to himself. Whitfield took Silas aside. "You wrote to me about a miracle," Whitfield said quietly. "Now I arrived to find ashes and missing people." Silas swallowed. "A tragic accident," he said. "Old wood, lanterns, carelessness." Whitfield studied him. "Where is the boy?" Silas hesitated. "Gone," he said. "He fled during the fire." Panicked. "And the woman?" Whitfield asked. "The one who brings tea." Silas felt his chest tighten. "Lena left as well." Whitfield nodded slowly. "Convenient." That night, Whitfield began writing reports. He described the paintings, the claims, the fire, the disappearance. He did not accuse anyone directly. But he did not defend Silas either. Dr. Hartley requested passage back to Richmond the next morning. Before leaving, he pulled Whitfield aside. "This was not a miracle," he said. "It was a machine, built carefully, operated with cruelty." Whitfield asked one question. "The boy?" Hartley shook his head. "The boy was watching. Lena did not go far. She hid in the woods beyond the fields, sleeping under brush, moving only at night. Her hands were swollen, her fingers split and bleeding. She wrapped them in strips torn from her dress. Elias found her on the second night. He moved through the forest like a ghost. Silent, careful. He had learned where not to step. Where sound traveled. "You should keep going north," Lena whispered. Elias shook his head. "They will follow you. They will follow both of us." She looked at him then. Really looked. The boy she thought she knew was gone. In his place was someone sharper. Older. "I can help you," he said. She wanted to argue, but she was too tired. In Richmond, rumors spread faster than facts. People whispered about the paintings that burned. About the disabled boy who painted like a master. About the plantation fire that erased evidence. Some claimed Silas Thorne had gone mad. Others said he had uncovered something unholy. One collector swore he had purchased a painting weeks earlier and now could not bring himself to look at it. Another claimed the eyes followed him. Silas remained at Thornhill, packing what little he could salvage. His house would be seized soon. He knew it. The Union did not forgive easily. Nor did curiosity. At night, he dreamed of Elias. The boy stood in the smokehouse, painting without brushes. Painting with memory. On the 5th night after the fire, Silas heard footsteps outside his window. He rose slowly. The house was silent. He opened the door. Nothing. But when he turned back, a single canvas leaned against the wall. Unburned, untouched. It showed a figure standing in flames, face calm, eyes watching. Silas screamed. By morning, he was gone. Some said he fled west. Others said he drowned himself in the river. No body was ever found. Captain Whitfield closed the case officially 2 weeks later. Cause of fire undetermined. Paintings destroyed. Artist missing. Unofficially, he kept Harley's letter locked away. Because the letter described something that troubled him deeply. Hartley believed Elias had learned more than anyone realized. Not technique, observation, timing, how to let others reveal themselves. In the woods, Lena taught Elias what she could. How to mix pigment from earth. How to prepare canvas. How to see structure beneath chaos. Elias absorbed it all, but he did not paint yet. He waited, because some lessons required distance. Months later, a small painting appeared in a church basement in Baltimore. No signature. Biblical subject. Crude in places. Brilliant in others. The pastor who found it could not explain why it made him uneasy. He locked it away, and somewhere far from Thornhill, Elias began the next phase of his life. Not as a miracle, not as a lie, but as something shaped by fire, and memory, and hunger, the kind that never goes away. The story was not over. It was only changing hands. Part 6. The Legacy of Shadows. Some secrets refuse to die. They linger in smoke-filled rooms, in charred wood, in the corners of eyes that have seen too much. The fire at Thornhill Plantation had destroyed paintings, documents, even the illusion of safety. But it had not destroyed Elias. He had survived. Lena had survived. And the world beyond the plantation would never be the same. Weeks passed after the fire. Thornhill was a ruin. The fields were overgrown. Animals wandered freely. Smoke still drifted from embers buried under ash. Silas Thorne was gone. Some whispered he had fled west, hiding among former Confederate sympathizers. Others said he had drowned in the James River, weighed down by guilt and fear. No one knew for certain. Whitfield filed his official report. He noted the fire, the loss of the paintings, and the absence of the boy. But he added nothing about Lena, nothing about what he suspected. Curiosity, he decided, could be dangerous. Some stories, once started, could never be contained. In the woods beyond Thornhill, Elias and Lena moved carefully. They avoided roads. They avoided towns. Each night they returned to the ashes of their former lives, scavenging what they could. Lena taught Elias how to mix pigments from berries, soot, and soil. How to stretch canvas from rough linen. How to make the illusion of depth and light without formal tools. Elias listened and watched. He learned faster than Lena could have imagined. Not just the technical skill. He learned timing, observation, patience. He learned how to make people believe what they wanted to believe. One evening, as the sun fell behind the horizon, Elias painted in the quiet. His movements were deliberate, not yet brilliant, not yet powerful, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the shadows for any hint of threat. Lena watched him, her hands trembling from exhaustion, her body still sore from the relentless work after the fire. "We cannot stay here forever," she said. "I know," Elias replied. "But we need to be ready." "Ready for what?" she asked. "For them." She did not need to ask. She knew who they were. Collectors, scholars, men who wanted miracles, who believed in them, who could be consumed by them. Whispers of Elias's talent had spread quietly. People remembered the boy who painted without hands. The fire only made the story darker, more tempting. Word traveled. By the fall, letters began to arrive. Anonymous envelopes containing sketches, requests, offers. Some came from Richmond, some from Baltimore, some from places Elias had never heard of. People wanted to see the boy who survived fire and loss. People wanted to own his work. Elias studied the letters carefully. He did not open most of them. He did not respond. Lena wanted to burn them. He stopped her. Every letter was a clue. Every word a signal. He was learning more than painting. He was learning the world. By winter, Elias began painting again. Not for show, not yet for survival, for himself. In the quiet of the woods, he created images that were dark and strange. Figures in shadow, faces half seen, Angels with hollow eyes. Scenes that seemed to flicker between terror and beauty. Lena did not ask questions. She only watched, too exhausted and too frightened to interfere. The first visitor came in early spring. A man claiming to be a scholar of art history, but Elias saw it in his eyes. He wanted to see a miracle. He wanted proof. Elias did not move. He let the man come to the edge of the clearing. The man found nothing. Just trees. Just shadows. No sign of Elias or Lena. The second visitor arrived weeks later. A wealthy collector. He had a letter of introduction from Whitfield himself. Elias let him wander the fields, listening, noting, always unseen. By the time the man left, he was uncertain if the boy even existed. Elias realized that survival was no longer about hiding. It was about control. The boy who had once been a puppet in Silas Thorne's scheme was becoming something else. Not a miracle, not a tool, but a force. And yet, the weight of the past clung to him. The fire, the smoke, the charred wood, Silas's lies, Lena's exhaustion, the stolen work. It all haunted him. Each painting he made carried fragments of that history. Each stroke was both creation and memory. By midsummer, Elias decided it was time to move. Thornhill was no longer safe. The experts, the collectors, the curious, all would return eventually. He packed canvases carefully. Lena carried pigments and brushes. They moved at night. They traveled lightly. The roads were dangerous. People asked questions. They ignored them. On the third night, Elias stopped and looked back at the blackened remains of Thornhill. Everything I knew began here, he said quietly. Everything I learned began here. He did not speak of Silas. He did not speak of the fire. But Lena understood. The path ahead was uncertain. The world wanted to claim him, to turn him into a story, into a spectacle. But Elias knew something. He could control the story now. He could choose what they saw. He could shape the myth. The first exhibition of his work came unexpectedly. In a small church basement in Baltimore, a single painting appeared. No signature. Biblical subject. Dark and raw. People whispered about the boy with no hands who painted like a master. Some claimed to feel unease in the presence of the canvas. Some said the eyes followed them. The legend grew. Letters arrived from collectors who could not resist temptation. Scholars requested to study the work. Patrons offered sums Elias had never imagined. And yet, he never sold. He never revealed himself. He had learned the price of exposure. The fire at Thornhill had shown him that. By the end of the year, Elias and Lena had found a hidden cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Isolated. Safe for now. The forest provided food and water. The air was cold. The nights were long. But here, Elias painted freely. Lena worked alongside him, her hands still aching but her spirit stronger than she had expected. They spoke little of Silas. They spoke less of the experts. But they spoke of strategy. Of survival. Of timing. Elias sketched, Lena refined. Together they created the illusion of chaos while building mastery. And somewhere deep inside Elias, a part of him began to consider what came next. The world would come for him again. It always did. The fire had been a warning. The letters were proof. But Elias no longer feared it. He had learned patience, observation, timing, the power of the unseen hand. And when the time was right, he would decide who saw the miracle and who did not. Because he had learned something that Silas never understood. A miracle is not in the painting. A miracle is in the eye that controls the painting. And Elias was no longer a boy who needed guidance. He was the master of his own shadows. And the world would pay attention. The story was far from over. It was only beginning. If you want, I can continue part 7, where Elias begins interacting with the outside world while keeping the legend alive, escalating tension and horror as the story moves into suspenseful encounters and moral ambiguity. Do you want me to write part 7 next? Part 7. The Return of the Curious. Curiosity is a dangerous fire. It can warm you or burn you alive. Elias and Lena had lived quietly for months in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Their cabin was hidden among thick trees, the forest their shield against the world. Elias painted almost every day. Lena refined his work, mixing pigments and preparing canvases. The hours passed in silence, broken only by the wind, the rustling of leaves, or the occasional call of a bird. They believed they were safe. They were wrong. It started with letters, sealed envelopes with elegant handwriting. Some contained praise, others contained requests. One arrived from a well-known collector in New York, offering more money than Elias had ever seen for a single painting. Another was from an anonymous scholar, claiming to have heard the story of the boy with no hands and insisting on a meeting. Elias did not respond. He burned some of the letters. He kept others. He studied the handwriting, the paper, the subtle signs of obsession. He had learned from Silas that people could be predicted. Their desires could be manipulated. Their weaknesses exposed. Then came the first visitor. A man on horseback, claiming to be a wandering painter seeking mentorship. Elias noticed immediately that his eyes were too sharp, too calculating. He spoke politely, complimenting the forest, the isolation, the cabin itself. He asked to see the work Elias had created. Elias refused. The man insisted. He promised safety, wealth, fame. Elias let him linger at the edge of the forest for a day, observing him, studying him, learning how he moved, how he watched. Then, just before nightfall, Elias disappeared. The man returned to his horse, confused, unable to find anyone. By morning, he was gone. He never mentioned Elias again. That night, Elias painted. His brush moved faster than ever. Lena watched in awe. Every stroke was precise, confident, alive. Elias had learned something essential. The world would always come for him, and he would always remain unseen until he chose to be revealed. Weeks later, the second visitor came. This time, a woman. She introduced herself as a wealthy patron from Philadelphia, interested in rare art and forgotten talent. She carried a notebook, asking questions about technique, inspiration, and discipline. Elias watched her carefully. Her pen never left the page, her eyes constantly scanning, her hands twitching with nervous energy. He decided to teach her a lesson. He allowed her to see one painting from a distance. Just the edge of it. A figure obscured in shadow. A hand reaching toward something unseen. She gasped, moved closer, tried to take notes. Elias remained hidden. She thought he had moved to the next room, then the next, but there was no next. He was nowhere. She left hours later, convinced she had glimpsed genius. She would spend months chasing a phantom. Elias smiled quietly to himself. The forest was both his canvas and his protection. Lena understood the risks. She had begun to fear that the world's curiosity could become violence if they were discovered. One morning, Elias woke to find footprints in the snow around the cabin. Fresh, large, not a hunter, someone deliberate, someone searching. He traced them. They led to the edge of the forest, then stopped. Elias studied them carefully. Whoever had left them was waiting. Testing. Curious. He and Lena prepared. For the first time since the fire, Elias considered leaving the mountains. Not far, not permanently, but enough to test the world, to see if his legend could survive exposure. They traveled at night, moving cautiously. Elias carried only a small portfolio of work, enough to spark interest but not enough to risk discovery. Lena carried pigments and brushes. Their first stop was a small town in Virginia. Elias displayed a single painting in the window of a shuttered shop while the town slept. When the townspeople woke, whispers began to spread. A boy who paints without hands. Images that look alive. Some said the painting was cursed. Others claimed it made them feel guilt, sorrow, or fear without knowing why. Word reached collectors faster than expected. Soon, letters arrived demanding to see more, offering sums that could buy a plantation. Elias and Lena read the letters together. "We must be careful," Lena said. Elias nodded. He understood. The world wanted a miracle, but the miracle could not be caged or owned. One night, a stranger followed them to the cabin. Elias noticed immediately. The man was careful, tracking them quietly, leaving signs of his presence. Elias and Lena did not confront him. Instead, they waited. When the man was close enough, Elias allowed him a glimpse of the paintings. Shadows moved in the candlelight. Figures whispered from the canvas. The man froze, mesmerized, then fell to his knees. He would not speak of what he saw. Elias had learned something crucial. Fear and awe could protect him. Curiosity could be weaponized. Months passed. They moved between hidden cabins, forests, and abandoned churches. Elias's work grew darker, his vision sharper. He painted scenes of fire, of ruin, of shadows consuming figures, of angels whose eyes watched the living. People who glimpsed the work felt unease, fascination, and awe all at once. Collectors offered more than money. Some offered protection, some offered threats. All were ignored unless Elias chose otherwise. And then a letter arrived that made his blood run cold. It was from Captain Whitfield. He had survived. He had remembered. He knew enough to recognize the pattern. He did not demand the boy, but he implied surveillance, investigation, and eventual discovery. Elias studied the letter. He folded it carefully. Then he burned it. The legend of the boy with no hands would continue, but the boy himself would decide how it lived. And in the darkness of the cabin, Elias whispered to Lena, "They are coming, but this time, we will be ready." Because the fire at Thornhill had taught him more than painting. It had taught him patience, timing, and control. It had taught him how to turn curiosity into fear, and fear into safety. The boy who once painted only to survive was now a boy who painted to command the world's attention. And the world had no idea what was coming. If you want, I can continue with part 8, where Elias begins to interact with influential collectors and scholars, turning the story into a tense chase filled with suspense, manipulation, and dark moral choices. Do you want me to write part 8 next? Part 8. The hunt begins. Some stories refuse to stay buried. Even in the quiet of the Blue Ridge Mountains, even in shadows thick enough to hide a ghost, some secrets call attention. Elias had survived fire, ruin, and the greed of collectors. He had learned the art of invisibility, of control, of fear. But the world outside would not leave him alone. It started with a letter, postmarked Philadelphia. No name, no address inside, just a single sentence: "We know who you are." Elias studied it for hours. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Someone was hunting him. Someone knew the boy with no hands was alive. Lena refused to read it aloud. She feared the words would carry more than the message. Elias understood her fear but did not respond. He was already planning. He had spent months studying the world, watching how people reacted to glimpses of his work. Now he would step forward deliberately. Not to display, not to perform, but to draw attention on his terms. The first step was Baltimore. A small exhibition in a forgotten church basement had already stirred curiosity. Elias returned there, traveling by night, moving silently through alleys and forests. He left only one painting, partially covered, leaning against the wall where the light would catch it. A shadowy figure in mid-motion, eyes blank but filled with emotion, hands reaching into darkness. By morning, word had spread. People whispered about the boy who painted like a master but had no hands. Scholars speculated, collectors schemed, some claimed to feel unease standing near the painting. Elias and Lena moved on before anyone could see them. Philadelphia came next. The letters had promised interest, and Elias intended to test it. He left a painting at the home of a local patron, carefully staged. It was visible from the street but hard to access. When the patron discovered it, he could not resist sharing it with friends. Soon a small crowd had gathered, discussing the impossibility of what they saw. Some swore the figure in the painting moved when unobserved. Others claimed the eyes followed them. Elias watched from a distance, hidden in shadows. He noted who came, how long they lingered, what they whispered. Some were curious, some were greedy, some were dangerous. It was a test. The first confrontation happened 2 nights later. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, appeared at the edge of the forest near their new cabin. Elias had expected him. He had studied the signs, the footprints in the snow, the faint marks in the soil. This man had followed the trail of whispers, the rumor of miracles, the faint scent of oil and pigment carried on the wind. Elias stepped into the clearing. The man froze. "You are Elias," he said. "Your paintings. The boy with no hands. We have been looking for you." Elias tilted his head. "Why?" The man shifted. "Money," he said. "Fame. Influence. The world wants to know you exist. It will pay. And if you do not comply, it will take what it wants by force." Elias studied him. He understood greed. He understood desire. He understood fear. And he understood that control was no longer about hiding. It was about shaping the story before anyone else could. He did not answer. The man took a step forward. "Do you understand what I am saying?" he asked. "You can make a fortune. Or they can take everything." Elias moved slightly, almost imperceptibly. The man flinched, as if sensing a presence beyond his eyes. Elias held his gaze, calm, controlled. "I paint for those who can see," Elias said finally. "Not for those who seek to own." The man swallowed hard. He backed away, muttering about returning with others, with force, with collectors, with scholars. Elias let him leave. By morning, letters and inquiries were already arriving in the towns beyond. He had drawn attention deliberately, but only to the weak, the greedy, the curious who could be manipulated. In the following weeks, Elias continued to move strategically. He left a painting here, a brushstroke there. Shadows that hinted at form, faces half concealed, figures twisted in the dark. People who glimpsed the work felt fascination, awe, and terror simultaneously. Some tried to follow, to capture, to discover. All failed. Lena had begun to fear the obsession that was building around them. She had seen the fire at Thornhill. She had seen how easily people could be consumed by desire. Elias understood her fear. He shared it. But he had also learned to use it. He used shadows, distance, and timing to control the narrative. Every glimpse of a painting became a rumor. Every rumor became a story. Every story fed the legend of the boy with no hands. By midsummer, he had begun sending messages intentionally. A painting left in a hotel lobby. A sketch found on a bench in a park. A portrait leaning against the wall of a small church. Each carefully placed. Each watched. Collectors came. Scholars came. Curious men and women came. Some left in awe. Some left in terror. Some never left. And through it all, Elias remained invisible. He had become more than a boy who painted. He had become a force. A shadow. A story that could not be contained. But even as he manipulated the outside world, Elias knew something else. Something dangerous. Someone had survived Thornhill with knowledge. Someone had remembered details that could undo the careful control he had built. Captain Whitfield was still alive. Elias had studied him in the reports he kept secretly, noting patterns, predicting movements, understanding how Whitfield thought. He knew it was only a matter of time before Whitfield, or someone like him, would return, bringing scrutiny, pressure, and possibly violence. The game was changing, and Elias realized, with a cold certainty, that he would have to become more than the boy with no hands. He would have to become the legend itself. Because the world was beginning to hunt. And he was ready. The shadows of Thornhill had followed him. The fire had shaped him. Lena had strengthened him. And the world, with all its desire and curiosity, was walking straight into his design. This was no longer survival. This was power. And Elias intended to claim it. The hunt had begun. If you want, I can continue part 9, where the tension escalates into a cat-and-mouse game between Elias and those who want to control or expose him, with a mixture of psychological horror, suspense, and manipulation. Do you want me to write part 9 next? Part 9. The Price of Legend. Some legends are not meant to be admired. They are meant to terrify. To teach caution. To remind the world that fascination has a cost. Elias had survived fire, ruin, and the endless curiosity of collectors. He had become invisible, a shadow moving through forests, towns, and abandoned buildings. Yet the world's obsession with the boy who painted without hands was growing. People were willing to pay anything, risk anything, to witness what they could not explain. And obsession is dangerous. It started with small things. Shadows that moved where there should be none. Whispered voices in empty streets. Footsteps that followed him at night, never visible, always present. Elias had become adept at disappearing, but even he could not ignore the creeping feeling that someone, or something, was closing in. Then came a visitor who was unlike the others. She did not leave letters. She did not approach openly. She watched. She studied. Elias noticed her the first night he returned to Baltimore. A woman with sharp eyes, elegant dress, and a notebook clutched tightly in her hands. She lingered at the edge of the crowd wherever one of his planted paintings appeared. She never spoke. She never moved closer. She only observed. Elias felt unease. There was something in her presence that reminded him of the fire at Thornhill, of Silas's obsession, of the danger that curiosity could bring. He decided to confront her. At night, he followed her quietly through the streets. She did not notice him. He watched as she made notes, her pen moving frantically, as if recording every detail of what she saw, every shadow, every angle, every way a figure could appear alive. She finally stopped near an abandoned warehouse. Elias watched from a darkened doorway as she crouched and looked at a small sketch he had left hidden in the snow. She murmured something under her breath, a word Elias could not hear. But the tone carried hunger, desire, calculation. He realized she was dangerous. Not because she wanted to own his work, but because she wanted to control the story itself. To take the boy, the legend, and mold it into her own narrative. The next day, letters arrived. Requests for meetings, offers of wealth, warnings, threats, every one carefully crafted, every one designed to lure Elias out. He did not respond. He watched. He waited. By autumn, he decided the game had to change. He would no longer simply hide and manipulate from the shadows. He would create a spectacle. Something that could not be ignored, something that could strike fear and admiration simultaneously. A single painting was delivered to the center of Baltimore. No signature, no note, just the image. A figure in darkness, hands reaching toward the viewer, eyes hollow yet alive, wings of shadow stretching beyond the canvas. People who saw it felt as if the painting was breathing, moving, watching. Panic spread quietly among the crowd. Fascination followed immediately. Collectors called experts. Scholars debated. Whispers of the boy with no hands reached newspapers, wealthy patrons, and underground societies alike. Elias remained unseen. Lena had been sent elsewhere for safety, carrying pigments and brushes, waiting for the next instruction. The woman returned. She had followed the trail. Elias knew it. He could feel it in the letters, in the small traces of observation left behind. This time, he confronted her openly. She was standing at the edge of an empty square when he appeared. No shadows, no hiding. Just Elias, small, deliberate, watching. "You are Elias," she said without fear. "I have studied you. I know what you can do. You cannot hide forever." And he replied simply, "I do not need to hide. I control what is seen." Her smile was thin. She stepped closer. Most would have felt threatened, but Elias felt only the thrill of the hunt. She was clever, meticulous, and dangerous. She was the first person who had ever truly challenged him. "I want the story," she said. "Not the paintings. Not the boy. The story itself." Elias tilted his head. "And if I refuse, then you disappear," she said. Not fear, Elias realized. Threat, but not empty. She had the skill, the knowledge, the patience to follow through. He could not predict her next move completely. That was rare. That was exhilarating. He left her standing in the square. A single painting remained at her feet. A shadowed figure that seemed alive. She stared at it, enraptured, furious, mesmerized. Elias knew the truth of power now. The story was more than survival, more than manipulation. It was control over perception itself. Anyone who sought the boy would become part of the myth, part of the spectacle, whether they realized it or not. But power has a cost. By winter, the pursuit intensified. Collectors, scholars, and thrill-seekers had banded together to find the boy. The legend had become irresistible. Every painting, every shadowed figure, every whispered story was a lure. Elias and Lena moved constantly. Safe cabins, forests, abandoned mills. They left no trace. Every step calculated, every painting a trap and a warning. Elias began to notice changes in himself. He was more patient, more cunning, more aware of danger. But he also felt a growing weight. The knowledge of what people would do for a miracle. The understanding that each observer could be consumed by their desire. He had seen obsession turn into violence. He had seen fear become madness. And he knew it was only a matter of time before it touched someone close to him. He could not stop the world from wanting him. He could only guide it, shape it, control it, and yet, every action reminded him of Thornhill. Of fire, smoke, and Silas. Of betrayal, manipulation, and lies. He had become a master. But the lesson of Thornhill remained. Every master eventually faces a reckoning. And he could feel it coming. The legend was complete. The boy with no hands was no longer just a story. He was a force, a shadow, a myth walking through the world. But someone was hunting the myth. Someone patient, ruthless, and clever. And Elias knew that the final act was approaching. Because the world would never let a miracle exist quietly. And when the reckoning came, the cost would be higher than anyone could imagine. Elias whispered to Lena that night. "We have built the story. Now we must survive it." And somewhere in the cold wind, the woman from Philadelphia watched. Patient, hungry, and determined. The hunt was no longer for paintings. The hunt was for him. And for the first time, Elias realized that even he might not control the outcome. The legend had become its own master. If you want, I can now write part 10, the final climax, where the story reaches its ultimate horror and resolution, revealing the fates of Elias, Lena, and everyone obsessed with the legend. Do you want me to write part 10 next? Part 10. The legend consumes. Some stories are never meant to end. They consume everyone who dares to touch them. Elias had survived fire, greed, obsession, and the endless curiosity of collectors and scholars. He had become a shadow, a legend, a force that no one could fully understand. He had learned to manipulate perception, to control attention, to make people fear what they could not see. But the final reckoning had arrived. It began in Philadelphia, in the mansion of the woman who had been watching him for months. She had gathered experts, collectors, and journalists. She wanted to see the boy for herself. She wanted to capture the story. She wanted control. Elias arrived quietly, unseen, hidden among shadows. Lena followed, carrying brushes and pigments. He had prepared for this moment for months. Every step, every gesture, every distraction was planned. The guests were already assembled in the main hall. Candlelight flickered across paintings that Elias had left strategically. Figures in shadow, faces that seemed to move when not observed. Scenes of darkness and light, life and death, captured with a precision that made people gasp and shiver. The woman stood at the front, impatient. She had expected a child. She expected a miracle. She expected the story to be simple. She would be disappointed. Elias revealed himself slowly, one hand resting lightly on a canvas. The stumps of his wrists visible. He did not speak. He did not move quickly. He let them see. Gasps filled the room. Some screamed, some wept, some fell to their knees. The woman's face changed. Curiosity turned to fear. Greed turned to desperation. Elias allowed only a single gesture. A brush stroke with one small movement, careful and deliberate. The effect was subtle but undeniable. The painting transformed before their eyes, figures twisting, shadows deepening, light shifting as if alive. Some people screamed, others were frozen, some fainted, and then he stepped back into the shadows. Panic erupted. Guests tried to reach him. They pushed, they shouted, they demanded. The mansion became chaos. The paintings, many of them rigged by Elias with subtle illusions and hidden mechanisms, seemed to move, to whisper, to watch. People ran. They collided with each other, knocking over chairs, candles, and tables. Lena worked quickly, guiding Elias through hidden passages she had discovered in the mansion months earlier. They moved unseen, leaving the guests trapped in a maze of shadows and fear. By the time anyone realized they had escaped, Elias and Lena were gone. Outside, the city was quiet. Snow had begun to fall, covering footprints, erasing traces, hiding the passage of legend. Elias looked down at his hands, at the stumps that had once been considered a limitation, and he smiled. Power, he realized, did not come from the world's recognition. Power came from control, from shaping what others believed, from being the shadow behind the story. The woman from Philadelphia would never capture him. She would never control the legend. Others would come, but they would find only what Elias allowed them to see. Fear, fascination, awe, and confusion. Weeks later, Letters arrived from collectors, scholars, and journalists. Some were offers, some were threats, some were confessions of obsession. Elias read them carefully. He did not respond. He allowed the stories to circulate. He let the myth grow. Lena stayed close, her hands stained with pigments, her eyes alert. She had survived Thornhill, she had survived the chase, and now she survived the legend. Together, they moved through forests, mountains, and small towns. Every step calculated, every moment deliberate. Elias painted, always, shadows, figures, eyes that followed, hands reaching into darkness. His work became darker, more powerful, more terrifying. The legend of the boy with no hands was no longer just a story. It was a presence, a force. And then, one evening, he paused. He looked at Lena. "We have done it," he said. "We have survived." "Yes," she said quietly. "But the world will always try to touch us, to control us, to own the story." Elias nodded. He knew. He had learned. He would continue to move, to hide, to manipulate, to protect. The world would never stop hunting. The world would never stop wanting. But now, Elias had learned the ultimate truth. The story was his. The legend was his. And he would survive it. Somewhere, in the shadows, the woman from Philadelphia watched from afar. She had learned to fear him. She would not attempt another pursuit. Others might try. But the boy with no hands, the shadow that moved through the forests, the master of fear and fascination, would always stay one step ahead. The world would never fully understand Elias. It would never fully comprehend the price of legend. And as the snow fell softly over the mountains, covering footprints, hiding traces, and erasing evidence, Elias picked up his brush. Lena mixed the pigments. The candle flickered. The shadows danced. And the legend continued. Because some stories refuse to end. Some stories refuse to be tamed. Some stories demand to be feared. And Elias, the boy with no hands, had become one such story. If you enjoyed this dark tale of mystery, horror, and history, make sure to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Hit the like button if you felt the chill in the shadows, and share this story with anyone who loves unsolved mysteries and dark legends. Drop a comment below and tell us where you are listening from. I love seeing how far this story has traveled and which part scared you the most. The legend of Elias may end here, but your curiosity is just beginning.